Yeah. Stay the fuck away from Chatham.
He'll fall in line.
Yeah, be better.
Tommy's back with 4 Season 2 picking up 2 days after the events of Season 1, and the whole feel around 4 Season 2 does feel like a mini reboot to the series by getting rid of storylines like Dahlia, which I did feel was out of place for a show that really should have been a continuation of the old power. Season 2 also seems to have gone back to the roots with the threat of law enforcement, a no-nonsense Mexican drug lord in Miguel Garcia, and with the Tommy Egan we were all familiar with. Episode 1 also focused heavily on the culture of Chicago and the real-world issues that we face today in everyday life, which is something I think was missing in Season 1. All over the world, not just in Chicago, hospitals are overrun with the wounded and injured. However, gun violence in Chicago does seem to be a problem, with not enough doctors and nurses to cater for those who are fighting for their lives. It also makes us ask the question, who are the real heroes in this world? Is it the influencers and sportsmen with millions of followers, or is it these nurses and doctors who are working day in and day out saving lives? Chicago also has a rich history embedded into the city in the form of art. With art you can express yourself in so many different ways by pushing boundaries and challenging social views. In today's day and age it can be used to fight for justice, equality, and more. Culture is Power is a graffiti which features images of 5 people, a message that conveys family, the new frontiers, shows women in a heroic stance in a cape, helping people believe in their visions and dreams, the last Aztec emperor in the neighborhood of Pilsen where the Mexican population do flourish. Chicago has a rich Latin history embedded in the form of art and people, which Season 2 does have a big focus on, this Latin culture, especially one Mexican drug lord who's set to shake up Power Book 4 Force Season 2. Now, the death of Liliana was always going to hurt someone like Tommy, especially considering it's only been 2 days, and we felt the presence of Liliana in more ways than her just talking to Tommy. The cereal that was left on the table was Lucky Charms, Liliana's favourite, which was an Easter egg to Season 1.
Your stash is in the cabinet under the sink. You talked to Claude lately?
Fuck no.
Losing loved ones is something Tommy should be used to by now, but it also doesn't mean it's easy. She was more than just a friend, she was a confidant, someone who Tommy turned to for advice, someone who held it down during some difficult moments, and Tommy opening up to Liliana about his blood family in Chicago shows Tommy put a lot of trust in Liliana, which is very rare. Liliana's words reminded Tommy of who killed her, someone from the Flynn organization, so taking over the map of Chicago isn't the only thing on Tommy's mind. Liliana told him to make whoever killed suffer. But just before we continue, I do want to pause it here. Tommy's contacts on his phone. There's Keffa, Harding, Palacios, and a few others, so maybe this is just something to keep an eye on. Now, Tommy knew Liliana was killed by someone from the Flynn organization, but with bullets flying everywhere, he just wasn't sure who. Now, his first target was the Flynn bodyguards, and this is the Tommy that we're all accustomed to seeing, ruthless and unforgiving. A scar to remember Liliana, and information on Walter Flynn's location which he did act on. That was despite Diamond telling him later to be smart and think before making a move. So I do question this move from Tommy. I know he does want revenge, but shooting someone like Walter Flynn in broad daylight may not have been the best idea, especially because Tommy does now have family that he does need to look out for as well. At the end of Go Season 3, we saw Kate with a house boxed up ready to make the move to Chicago, where she now lives here at her mother's house with JP and D-Mac. Kate's great with D-Mac, and Tommy couldn't believe what he was seeing, because this isn't the Kate we're accustomed to seeing from Power.
Brought you a gift, Kate.
You're always such a thoughtful boy, Jamie. You could teach Tommy a thing or two.
Her refusing Coke was very surprising, because in Power Kate wasn't Kate without a high, but the fact she did refuse this shows maybe Kate is trying to right some wrongs. She did leave JP at a very young age, and I think she knows that she wasn't the greatest mother to Tommy either. So as Diamond's parole officer Mr. Reeves said, we aren't defined by our biggest mistake, but if God gives you a second chance and you decide to squander it, then that's definitely on you. Now she could also be ill, although I am leaning more towards her trying to right some wrongs, so I am expecting more details around the Egan family and backstory and some reasons as to why Kate made certain decisions. With Jannard and Diamond, we pick up with them torn in two. On one side we have Diamond, who now controls the CBI. On the other hand, we have Jannard's crew, who now goes by the name of Treason and is shoot on sight if any of the two crews step on each other's toes in the street. But with the CBI torn in two, territory was also split, which didn't go down well with one particular member of the CBI, Chewie. Now, Tommy did lay down the law he can be friendly or he can make their lives living hell because their job was to stack paper. So instead of getting their bricks for 34 a key, they were now going to buy them for 31 under Tommy and Diamond. But Chewie still didn't like the decision over territory, along with Diamond partnering with Tommy, so he was always going to be a problem. With Jenard, he's got a mountain full of problems already. He's low on product, blocks and bodies, and he also had issues in gathering enough cash for the re-up with Miguel, someone who he knows not to get on the wrong side of. Diamond also had a few issues of his own. Adrian broke things off with him, although that isn't the problem, his parole officer is. Diamond used to have this previous parole officer on the CBI payroll, but unfortunately Mr. Reeves, he can't be bought. So he's going to be doing random drug tests, random visits to his home and his workplace, which is going to make it extremely difficult for Diamond to move and conduct business. The Flynn family were broken beyond repair after the end of season 1, but that was the least of Walter's problems. Brendan Doyle came for answers because Dublin supplied Walter with men who never came back, the 4 horsemen. So Doyle was here to collect, and he didn't care if Walter had a good relationship with his father. The price for peace was huge, and it is something Walter Flynn can't afford. Uncle Paulie, who's been the only man who stuck by Walter's side, later said they couldn't afford to pay Doyle without selling assets, but selling assets or asking for more time would show weakness, which is the last thing Walter Flynn wanted to show Dublin after losing the 4 horsemen. Vic seemed to be struggling to come to terms with Gloria's death and still blames his father. Drunk and high, he seems to be a wreck, still reminiscing about his and Gloria's dream they drew on the napkin, a death he blames Walter Flynn for. Claudia was also in the same boat as Vic. Neither of them trust their father, but they needed Walter to dead the issues with Dublin, and Walter still provided them with some level of protection. It was also clear that Claudia still needed a father because she knows Tommy would stop at nothing to avenge the death of Liliana, and who pulled the trigger? It was Claudia. Now Walter wanted them to show a united front to take down Tommy Egan, but Claudia and Vic are done with his lies and manipulation. They came together to raise their glasses to a new partnership, with Dahlia being the foundation, but Claudia is someone who definitely can't be trusted. Even though she wasn't the one who screwed up with the Dahlia recipe, her vision was foreshadowed as she sat in Walter Flynn's chair in 101. She wants power, control, and she's extremely ambitious. So that's where we are with the CBI along with Tommy, Treason and the Flynns, but there is a new team in town who are also keeping an eye on them like we are, law enforcement. We saw a hint on a foreshadow at the end of season 1 that law enforcement would play more of a role in season 2 because they wanted to know the identity of this mystery man. They believe the chaos in Chicago was linked to this ghost, but Tommy was careful wherever he goes. They referenced him to having eyes at the back of his head, and he certainly had his head on a constant swivel and noticed law enforcement in season 1. He's a seasoned criminal who knows the game. He's extremely careful, wearing gloves at all times so he doesn't leave prints. Now, AUSA Stacy Marks wanted his fingerprints by the end of the week, which they did get while Tommy did give JP his new bar. We saw Agent Hardwick and Vargas swoop in and take the prints from Tommy's blue Mustang.
You mean like he faked his own death? Only someone with a lot to hide does that.
Law enforcement have the details of Tommy Egan, and it was only going to be a matter of time. I mean, let's face it, he couldn't avoid them forever or remain a ghost. Now later they referenced to how the Southern District tried to build a case against him and his partner back in New York, but they couldn't make anything stick, and reference to James St. Patrick because 1, he's smart, and 2, because he's dead. They spoke to New York's field office and they told Chicago that he was burned to death in a car they were pursuing, so they don't believe Tommy Egan's alive. They said it was impossible. Agent Vargas also said only a man who has a lot to hide would fake his own death, which was followed up by AUSA Stacy Marks saying she was going to request a task force, so expect a team to come on board to investigate Tommy Egan, which in turn would give them the most of Chicago's biggest players. We have the Flynns, the Serbs, CBI, Treason, and Miguel Garcia who has links to the cartel. All of these crews were making business moves in episode 1, with Claudia making her move with Dahlia. Meanwhile, Jenard was making his move with Diamond's crew because he was low on territory and soldiers. He approached Chewie and offered him a deal to switch to Treason, which Chewie was happy to do because he was able to strike a better deal. But the mistake Chewie made was going behind Tommy's back, and we're going to get to that in a bit more detail later on. Introducing Miguel Garcia, a violent domineering alpha, one of the biggest connects in Chicago, along with Merkovich, who had the door open so Jenard could see what happens if you fuck with him. Now, Jenard made a schoolboy error when he came to this meeting light, because one thing you do not fuck with is a connect's money. In Power, when Ghost and Tommy's organization was hit, they never let it affect the pay schedule with Felipe Lobos. Jenard coming light was also very reminiscent to Vic and the Yardies in season 1, and Miguel Garcia doesn't play games when it comes to his paper. It also shows Jenard hasn't got his shit in order, and he needed outsider investment to keep his organization alive, at the same time trying to avoid another threat, Merkovich. Now Claudia at this moment in time was still making a move with Dahlia, and so she politely refused. This is where we were introduced to Shanti Showstopper Page, a prize ex-professional boxer that runs her own gym. She's fearless and ambitious, a dangerous combination. She's not just someone who works under Jannard for treason, she's Jannard's love interest and has his back. Now based on her background as a boxer, we know Shanti is going to be tough, but with Jannard's mountain of problems, will she be a ride or die? As her character description says, she's ambitious, so will she stick with a sinking ship? Following Jannard's meeting with Miguel Garcia, it was now Diamond and Tommy's turn. Now Miguel Garcia's introduction to Force has added a Mexican cartel vibe to Force. He showed he isn't just someone who can be violent, he's also smart and intelligent. He wasn't expecting anybody to come with Diamond, so when Tommy began to cause a little chaos, he had his crew do the rounds to make sure they had no more uninvited guests. He also had his guys on the roof on the lookout. As I broke down before season 2, he's known as a spider, someone who's very strategic and someone who does his homework. He knew about the internal beef between Jannard and Diamond, but as long as it didn't fuck with his money, they could kill each other for all he cared. Now Tommy wasn't wasting any time. They didn't have any cash flow problems like Jannard. He asked for double the product, but Miguel Garcia wasn't doing any business with Tommy. He wanted to do business directly with Diamond, which you can't blame him for. Now, while Tommy was in the back, we learned how Miguel Garcia has beef with the Serbs because they're direct competitors, but more importantly, Garcia wanted to make sure Tommy wasn't going to be a problem, which we all know he will be. He's here to take over the map of Chicago and maybe even more. He was at the back getting acquainted with Maria Garcia, the sister of Miguel, who Tommy needs to be very careful around. Having eyes for Miguel Garcia's sister will definitely bring big trouble. Diamond said there's a graveyard full of men who have made the same mistake. Now this was one of the promo images that was released prior to season 2, where Miguel does seem like he has 2 of his own men tied down in chairs in front of Tommy and Diamond, and if he's willing to do this to his own, then I'm pretty sure he'll have no issues doing this to Tommy and Diamond if they 1. Fuck with his money, or 2. His sister. There's a huge family culture embedded into the Mexicans, and he'll do anything to protect the ones he loves.
I don't want anything about blood money. I want a different life.
Now later, Tommy does bump into Maria at Tillman's hospital where she works as a nurse. This was after D-Mac's gunshot wound became infected, and she does Tommy a favor by looking out for his nephew. He also clocks she does have a boyfriend, but I think we all know Tommy Egan. That's not going to stop him. Something else Tommy will never stop chasing is the top spot in Chicago. He wants to go straight to the source and take advantage of the beef that the Mexicans have with the Serbs. But to be the connect in Chicago, it means taking out Markovic and Garcia, which is a dangerous play and a move that he's not in a position to make at this moment in time. He also had more pressing issues to deal with. Claudia had Dahlia back on the street, but this was something that Tommy cancelled with quickness. He made a call to JP, who knew the recipe of Dahlia. In season 1, Liliana learned from the doctor, and then she showed JP. So with JP exposing Dahlia, it meant the streets were about to be flooded with bootleg versions, which meant her designer drug was worthless. Claudia then killing the doctor, and with Dahlia losing its value, then causes a divide between Vic and Claudia, and they go their separate ways. Although I don't think this will be the last we hear of Claudia. She's ambitious and hungry, so I do expect her to make a move in the streets in some shape or form. Someone else who wants to make moves is D-Mac. He shows Tommy a more modern method of moving product. But this is the problem that Tommy faces in Force. He's operating the criminal world in Chicago while trying to protect and care for his family, which really is going to prove to be incredibly challenging and dangerous. At times, he's going to have to drop everything at the drop of a dime and be there for D-Mac, JP, and Kate. It's also a very similar problem that he had with his other nephew, Tariq St. Patrick. With D-Mac, he's trying to shield him as much as possible because he knows how Tariq turned out, and he tells him if he's going to do this, he's going to do it from this house. But how long can Tommy shield D-Mac from the streets? Being involved in the criminal world exposes you to constant dangers and threats, just like the Serbs who had no issues in holding Liliana captive in season 1, or like the Flynns did with JP. So let's see how Tommy navigates the criminal world in Chicago while also protecting his family. Moving on to the Serbian network, Jannard promised Markovic territory, which happened to land in Diamond's share when the CBI was split into 2. But Tommy and Diamond aren't just going to hand over territory. They rightfully tell him that's a problem he needs to deal with Jannard. Markovic then comes for Jannard, telling him he wants the projects back, and similar to Miguel Garcia, Markovic isn't playing games either. Now the only way for Jannard to get that territory back is either to strike a deal with Diamond or take it by brute force, because we all know Tommy won't just let go of that territory. So Jannard's next move will be definitely interesting, especially after Tommy made his. Diamond tells Tommy that one of their soldiers flipped to treason, but to think before they make a move because killing him would only add to the bad blood between treason and the CBI. But for Tommy, reputation is everything in the streets. If you let people walk all over you and take soldiers from your organization without any retaliation, it only shows weakness, and what does that tell the other soldiers in their organization? We all know from history Tommy doesn't deal with disrespect well, he will get revenge. So was it the right call in putting 3 bullets in Chewie in front of the stop the violence sign? Disrespect certainly had to be dealt with, but in my opinion it should have been dealt with in a different way, because Diamond did tell him to think before making a move. What this also does is set off a chain reaction, which will cause tension between the CBI and treason, and that's the last thing any of them need with a task force that's about to get off the ground, and with Tommy Egan now firmly in the sights of law enforcement.